on HAP, many of whom are already paying out huge amounts of money in top-ups to landlords and are now seeing their differential rent to the council being hiked up. Particularly hits hard those who are suffering from the housing crisis, those who are living in overcrowded accommodation. It's absolutely scandalous that they would take this decision. We put forward, People Before Profit, on the council an alternative, which was to increase rates on the biggest 2.5% of businesses. It would have no impact on any other businesses, but their rates would be rebated back to them, and it would have given 2.2 million more for housing maintenance than the Executive's proposal, would have provided extra funding for housing support advisors, would have delivered extra funding for traveller specific accommodation, and crucially would have scrapped the rent increases. These rent increases in Dublin City Council aren't due to come in until April 2026, so the campaign is not over just because the budget has passed. We're encouraging tenants to join CATU. We're encouraging tenants to get organised. Obviously back in 1974, 1975 there was a rent strike of council tenants in opposition to the increase of rents, and we think similar sort of people-powered grassroots movement from below has to be organised to defeat these rent hikes. And just to say, this is not going to be limited to one or two councils. So in the council that I represent in South Dublin County Council, this is on the agenda. It isn't included in the budget for the coming year, but it's something that the management is talking about. It's included in the government's housing plan. They clearly point at increasing council rents across the board. So council tenants and HAP tenants across the board need to get organised to defeat this rent increase at a time of a cost of living crisis. Secondly, there was a hugely successful, large protest of taxi drivers on Saturday out here against the Uberisation of taxis and the introduction of so-called fixed fares by Uber, which are an attempt to circumvent the basic regulation that we have of taxis in this country, whereby there's a taxi meter regulated by the NTA which sets what the prices are. With these fixed pricing, Uber is undercutting those fares, leaving taxi drivers in a terrible situation, and this is going to be a race to the bottom, which is hurting taxi drivers, which will hurt consumers, users of taxis as well, because Uber will get to set the prices at different times. So at some times the taxi drivers will get absolutely ripped off, at other times consumers, users of taxi drivers will see prices extremely high. The answer to this, what the taxi drivers are calling for, is for the NTA to have a not-for-profit app which all the taxi drivers are able to use, because what happens is that these app operators, who have very little beyond an app, it's an algorithm, are able to make huge amounts of money based off of the work of taxi drivers. There's very few people working for the likes of Uber in Ireland or the other apps. We need a not-for-profit app introduced by the NTA to organise our taxi system. The third point to raise is in relation to the cost of living crisis, which obviously gets worse day by day. We've just had a budget that makes the vast majority of people poorer, in particular disabled people poorer. And the environmental crisis, we've just had COP30, which managed to have an agreement which doesn't mention the words fossil fuel, and shows how just we are tobogganing towards absolute catastrophe with our eyes wide open, and the world's leaders have given up effectively on doing anything about it. These two issues combine in a bill that will be voted on Wednesday night, which is a bill to introduce minimum standards in the private rented sectors, minimum BER standards. So renters are living in disproportionately cold, drafty, damp, mouldy houses, and the government's previous promise in the last housing plan to introduce minimum standards in the private rented sector is scrapped in the current housing plan. We introduced a bill on Thursday, it was debated, the government opposed it, incredibly, to say that we need standards that by 2030 all rented properties should have to reach a standard of B2 or higher. So there's going to be the vote is going to take place on Wednesday night. We're encouraging people to contact their TDs, ask them to vote in favour of this bill to give renters a warm home, allow them to reduce their bills and reduce our carbon emissions.
Should we start speaking about the issue that's been put forward in relation to refugees and this idea of a fair contribution is how it's being phrased in relation to accommodation, if it is the case that you have a job. What's your response to that argument being put forward by Jim Callum and by Conor?
Okay, well, first of all, refugees tend to have very low incomes, and they tend to have a number of children. They don't get child benefits, for example. So you have to understand that their incomes are pegged way lower than most people. An IPAS accommodation generally isn't something that it's very highly restricted. You know, your meals are provided, but they're not necessarily the food that you want. There's curfews. I mean, it's not a normal accommodation situation, and I think this is purely being done as virtue signalling to the far right and to racists in this country who want to scapegoat migrants, who want to scapegoat refugees for the problems that we face. And I just want to reiterate that migrant workers and refugees and asylum seekers are not to blame for the housing crisis. We've record homelessness. It existed 12 years ago. I was raising this issue, contacted by people in my area. I reiterate 105 families in Dublin 15 have eviction notices they've told Fingal Council. One family was evicted last week with horrific ferocity by the bailiffs. No fault of their own, living in the house for over 15 years, and just the house has been sold. So that's what the government seems to be trying to deflect from. It's very convenient, and aping Nigel Farage and aping the British government and working in tandem with them is really, really terrible for a country that has a massive budget surplus, lots of vacant homes, and all of the other points that we've made before. Also, it's not safe accommodation either, as we know. Like, you could be assailed with protests regularly outside. We had people at City West, the kids couldn't go to school for days.
Ruth, what did you think of the Commissioner for Immigration yesterday saying that City West was a front runner in the EU towards the asylum pact?
The front runner?
He said Ireland was a front runner when it comes to implementing the asylum pact, and he was very complimentary. So he could only commend what he saw at City West yesterday.
I'm not really sure what he meant about City West.
Best in class, I think. Yeah,
they
call it like the best
City
in
West,
class.
that's correct.
Okay, well, I suppose one positive thing is that at least the government owns City West, and it is, you know, it is state owned, and therefore somebody isn't profiting from the housing of those people. My favourite option would be that people who come here will be able, like anybody else, to be housed properly, living in communities, not isolated, not segregated. You know, that they be able to work, that they be able to become part of the community rather than stuck in these silos, which leaves them very open to be attacked as well. We have got a huge number of vacant houses. The government, we see dereliction all over the place. It would be much better rather than these giant centres, which also often do take away the